Hello, good evening, and welcome to this short video introducing project management. My name is Sydney Lobshanov. I'm a PMP, Project Management Certified Professional, and I want over the next 15 or so minutes to introduce the subject of project management to you. One thing that's been buzzing a lot lately is the subject of project management, and so many things have been referred to as projects, and I think that I'll begin by trying to clarify the air or clear the air as to what exactly or what precisely project management is. But in order to do that, I would appeal to a quote by Benjamin Franklin. He says that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I'm sure you've looked back on a day when you did not get your to-do list together or some scheduling in place, and you sat back and wondered, where did the day go? It's already 5 p.m. and you still have reports undone and things that you have not responded to. Just as it happens in our typical work day, where failing to plan your day can turn into a really catastrophic day, so it happens in much of life. And deliberate effort is what leads to success in most cases. So I like to think about a project as something that you're doing that may not be the regular thing you do on a daily basis, and for which reason you need to put in some extra or special effort. And I like to think about project management as deliberate efforts or deliberate steps that you're taking in order to increase the odds of success in that direction. So a project really is something that you are setting out to do or achieve, and that is achieved by taking deliberate steps under the guise of project management in order to deliver that result. So um, Benjamin Franklin is telling us that if we fail to make plans or to plan, then our intent really is to fail. Take a beautiful thing like the Eiffel Tower in France, or the World Trade Center in the US, or the Statue of Liberty in the US, or the White House, or even the Flagstaff House in Accra, Ghana, or the Mausoleum of Kwame Nkrumah in Accra, or some lovely building that you pass by on your way to work or to school, or even your school buildings or office buildings, or the car you drive in, or the bus you take en route to work or school or wherever you go on a daily basis. It doesn't take much effort to realize that that object or that vehicle or that building didn't just snap into place. The architect did his job, the masons did their job, the construction company did their job, the plumber did his job, and each person played a part in building that structure that you see completed today. And that really is the whole idea of project management. Having a goal in mind, say a 6-bedroom house with 2 baths and 3 toilets and a guest room and a playroom and a piano room, for instance. That's the whole idea. That's the final goal. So your project really is that final goal. And in order to do this, there are so many ways to look at how to manage this project. Just as you have different units of measure, say for length, meters, feet, centimeters, millimeters, for instance, there are also a number of, if you like, frameworks that you can use to manage the process to produce the result of a project. So one of such frameworks is referred to as a PMBOK guide, Project Management Body of Knowledge, PMBOK, and it's produced by the Project Management Institute in the US, and this is one of the leading bodies that superintends the practice of project management globally across the world. Now the PMBOK guide, as it's referred to, PMBOK, it's just what its name is. It's a guide. It's recommendations. Remember that I said that project management, in my own words, the deliberate steps that you take to increase the likelihood of delivering your product or your project. And so the PMBOK guide really is recommendations. I haven't followed the work of several project managements and tested these things in the field through a number of iterations of propose steps that if you take will increase the likelihood of building that house, of building that car, of producing a new drug, of releasing a new service to your clientele. So the PMBOK guide, a PMBOK guide, describes a project as, first of all, a temporary endeavor that results in the creation of a unique product, result, or service. A temporary endeavor. And I think it's very important to distinguish a temporary endeavor from a permanent endeavor. What this means is that there's a defined start date and that there's a defined end date. On the worst case, there's a defined period for which this entire activity has to be carried out. So take, for instance, the construction of a road in your neighborhood. Um, Say a two-lane, two-way traffic road that spans 4 miles or 4 kilometers, whichever you're more comfortable with. This is a defined activity. The road construction is not going to go on ad infinitum. It's probably maybe earmarked to take 6 months. We know the road to be of length 4 miles or 4 kilometers, depending on whether you're British or American. And then, well, it'll end. And once it ends, it's released for use. So this is where it's important to distinguish between what constitutes a project and what one may refer to as operations. So for instance, an example from the bank may suffice. Every time you go to the bank and present a slip to withdraw some money or to deposit some money, the bank teller is operating. It's something she does on a daily basis. Or go to a car wash. Any day the attendant washes your car, he is operating or he's involved in operations. Operations are day-to-day activities. But say your car wash is named A, and car wash A decides to open a new outlet in a different city or state or town. That activity will begin at a definite time, and over a period of time, when the car wash, the new one, is launched, that project comes to an end. So the PMI says that it really is a temporary endeavor that you carry out over a starting period through to an ending period, and it results in the production of a unique result, product, or service. Now, the PMI says that project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques in order to produce or to meet project requirements. Again, the car wash example might suffice, or even a housing example is better. You want to put up a 4-bedroom house with a piano room, with a kids' playroom, with a library or study, and ensuite baths and showers. That's your product, or that's your project. And what you require, the 4 rooms, the guest room, the kids' living room, the ensuite, shower, and toilet facilities. Those are your requirements. Now, one could just begin by digging some form of a foundation and begin to lay blocks and bricks and hope that somewhere down the line they would have produced a 4-bedroom house with a study, ensuite, bathroom, and showers, and, well, a kid's living room. But anyone in their right minds knows that that's probably a recipe for disaster. Of course, that doesn't preclude people from doing that anyway. But if you wanted to increase the odds or the likelihood of succeeding in that endeavor, I reckon that you would get an architect or a draftsman to put up a design. You would probably get a structural engineer or quantity surveyor to do your quantities, to tell you how many bricks or blocks you might require, how much in terms of iron rods you might require. A structural engineer probably to look at the structures, for instance, if we're a story building, to tell you how wide your columns and beams and things like that should be, probably how deep your foundation is, even before you would go on to dig the soil. Then of course, with your plan in place, you might go on to hire a construction firm or a number of workers to build that structure. And that is the whole idea of project management. The idea that we do not just begin things, but we actually spend some time to think through it and to take deliberate steps to increase the likelihood of success. Of course, one must realize that deciding to start digging and building the house when you have no plan increases the likelihood of the building collapsing on you and your kids and their video games maybe. And also the fact that you might have to redo some parts several times because there's no deliberate plan to achieve that end. So the PMI says that, well, we think that in order to do a project like this, um, we are giving you some recommendations on how you should do this. And we think that every project has a life cycle from beginning through to the end. Remember, a project is a temporary endeavor. It starts and it ends. And when it's done, it's transitioned to operations. So if we put up that new car wash I cited earlier, then the maintenance of that car wash becomes operational matters, which are no longer project matters. So the PMI says that, well, we think that a project goes through a number of cycles, and we would like to call each step of the way a process. So, for instance, we would say that when you're beginning the project of building that four-bedroom house, we would say that you are initiating the process. Now, the PMI Institute prefers to use the ing gerund form of words, so they'd say initiating rather than initiation, and they're saying that, okay, so a process is a thing that we recommend you do at a particular group. So in its newest framework, which is the 5th edition of the PMBOK guide, which I referred to earlier, it recommends 47 of these processes, and it groups these processes into what it refers to as process groups. So for instance, the PMI says that if you want to estimate how much time your project will take, call that a process. So we'll call it the estimate activity process as an example, or acquire HR team process, or control scope process, or plan procurements process. So essentially, it's just recommending steps, and each of these kinds of steps it refers to as a process. Now, it clubs these processes together depending on what they do into process groups. And after all this analysis, the PMI says we have 5 of those process groups. The first being initiating, which are the processes that you follow to begin the project. The planning processes, which are the processes that you follow to plan the project. The executing processes, which are processes that you follow to execute the project. The monitoring and control processes, which you do to ensure that your project is in course. And 5th, of course, is a closing process group. So 47 processes span across 5 process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing processes. I hope that's quite clear. So immediately one realizes that the PMI is not saying, oh, for a building project, dig the foundation first. No, it's saying that, well, we think that if you need to do a building project, you need to start it, so you need to initiate it. You need to plan it because you need to get structural drawings, architectural drawings. You need to execute it, get the work done. You need to check along the way that you're actually building a 4-bedroom house, another 6th one. You still have that living room in place, etc. And you need to close. You need to pay off the contractor. You need to move in, and then you need to say, hello wife, now it's time to clean up the house every day. That's operations right there. So essentially, if I were doing, say, a drug, for instance, to meet a particular to solve a particular disease problem, I need to start that process probably in a lab. I need to plan how I'm going to carry out my experiments and probably look for a drug. I'll probably need to go on and execute that plan, take samples, tests, validate results that's actually executing. I need to monitor and control. In the pharmaceutical area, for instance, this would probably be checking the quality of the drug, the reaction maybe to a few poor lab mice, and then controlled exposure to human beings until it passes all the processes, and then is ready for production, and finally when you can close that project. Or take the formulation of a new product in a bank or some marketing firm. The whole idea is to create a new product. You need to start that process. What's that goal? Probably to create a differentiated product. Then you need to plan how you're going to roll it out. Then you need to execute that rollout plan. And while you're doing that, you probably need to get some reports to check how well it's going, what adjustments you must make along the way, monitoring and controlling. And once that is done, the product is live, then you can close it and go on to formulate a new product. It should be clear by now that these are not industry specific recommendations, but these are in fact recommendations that one can use irrespective of industry, and that's the beauty of it. So first, processes, which are activities that you carry out along the step of the way, and they have grouped these activities into what they refer to as process groups, namely initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. Now the PMI says that, okay, let's say that you want to estimate the time as we referred to earlier. Okay, so that's probably in the planning process group. So estimate activities as an example, activity durations as an example, as an activity you do. But is it just enough to estimate how long activities will take? They said no, there's probably another thing you can do, which is to estimate the resources for that activity. So the PMI says that, okay, well, process groups are good. Yes, we like them. We'll keep our 5 process groups. But they're also saying, okay, if we need to do a series of activities related to time, we'll club all those processes related to time and we'll call them a knowledge area. So we'll call it a time management knowledge area. So for instance, we'll say that we'll estimate activity resources, which is related to time. We'll estimate activity durations, again related to time. And then, well, we'll probably schedule activities or sequence activities. We will develop a schedule as a result of that. So it says that, well, while we group processes into not process groups, initiating, planning, executing, etc., will also group related processes into a knowledge area. So the difference lies in this. In the initiating process group, you could have a process that relates to time, that relates to costs. You could, of course, but these are more correctly in the planning process group. You could have a process that relates to time, whatever other else in the initiating process group, whereas in a knowledge area, you will have activities that are related to a particular knowledge area. So the PMI says that, yes, we do have 5 process groups that span across all these knowledge areas, but we also have 10 knowledge areas now, namely integration management, cost, human resource, stakeholder, scope, quality, communications, time, procurement, and risk management. So what the PMI is saying is that, yes, I may have a number of processes related to risk, which may be under planning, but in that column of the planning process group, I could also have activities that relate to time, planning, to cost, or to quality. So there are 2 concepts here, the idea of a process group, initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, closing, and the idea of knowledge areas. So you could think of process groups as a horizontal header, and you could think of knowledge areas as that on the vertical column. And essentially, so your initiating process groups are your x-axis, and if you like, your y is the knowledge areas. So the PMI says that, well, we have thought through and we think that you need no more than 47 processes. And if you do some of these things or take some of them up in some form or fashion, we should be able to help you increase the likelihood of succeeding at building a bridge, building a house, building a car, introducing a new product or service. And so that's how we look at it. So it says basically, well, we think that you need to do cost, quality, time, human resource, risk, communications, and the others as mentioned. And so that's how the PMI recommends. So a classic example in a very high panoramic view really is that you would begin a project by initiating it, and in that you would identify stakeholders who are people who will be affected by the project. So for instance, that's a process, identify stakeholders, which is in the project stakeholder management knowledge area. Don't be worried if this sounds a bit bemusing. In subsequent videos, I'll take this step by step so it's clear. But the PMI says that if you identify stakeholders, you would know what they expect, and knowing what they expect, you can gather their requirements. You can create a scope document, which you'll be doing the planning process group. You will plan your project, and then you would know what activities need to be done. You would know how long these activities would take. You would estimate the resources required. You would develop a schedule. You would acquire the team. You would know their cost. You would work in a budget, and knowing the budget, you could propose a budget for the project, including a needed contingency. You could plan what the quality is. You could plan also how often you will communicate to all those who are affected, and then you could also manage your risk as well. So essentially what he's saying, and for instance in a construction scenario, you would need to buy items for construction, and so procurement comes into place. So the PMI really is recommending that once you follow some systematic plan, which they give in the PMBOK guide, you can apply it to any industry and you would increase the odds. The point is not that it's foolproof, but the key matter is increasing the odds of success. So all the things that you have heard about project management, really to attempt to summarize, is simply this: that a project is some new thing you want to do that is different from what you do on a daily basis, which is operational. It has a predefined end, a new product, a new service, a new house, a new car, a new drug, a new book, for instance, even your wedding, or some anniversary or party that you're planning. That's a predefined start time and an end time. And project management really is what you do by taking deliberate steps in order to increase the likelihood of succeeding at that activity. And to do that, the PMI says that we think that if you initiate, you plan, you execute, you monitor and control each step of the way to ensure you're actually getting there, and then when you are done and everything is all hale and rosy, you close, that will guarantee. But to do that, they recommend that you go through a step of 47 processes. Of course, depending on which type of project it is, you may not need to go through those 47 processes, but you would still find within the PMBOK guide and framework more than sufficient steps or processes that would increase the likelihood of success. I'm hopeful that this video has actually whetted your appetite to find out more. In subsequent videos, I'll take them one by one, discussing things from a PMI perspective and how you can, through a process, begin to prepare yourself to increase the likelihood of success. Remember, as Benjamin Franklin said, that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And the statistics are bound for many projects that have failed, not because the intent was not good, but because deliberate steps were not taken to increase the likelihood of success. This is project management. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Cheers. If you have any questions, do feel free to send me an email at Sydney, SIDNEY, at pmpthoughts.com, and be glad to take some time from my schedule to answer them. Thank you and cheers.